The day I moved into room 403, I was at my breaking point. I expected another night of tossing and turning in a strange city, but the moment I closed my eyes, the most beautiful piano melody drifted through the walls. I slept for 10 hours straight. It felt like the apartment itself was healing me. But the truth was, it was the man in room 402. He had been playing for the shadows long before I arrived, and I was about to give him everything I had for a lie. We had a deal. My home-cooked pasta for his midnight music. For 6 months, I was his protector. I skipped my own lunches and used my rent money to buy him clothes and shoes, thinking my struggling musician had nothing but his talent. I was so happy to be the one to save him. Right up until the moment I stood in the back of the corporate gala and watched the man I loved walk out as the new chairman. My name is Minho. I moved to this city for a job. That's the short version. The long version is uglier. The long version is that I sold my old apartment, 3 pieces of furniture, and a guitar I'd had since I was 16. I packed 2 suitcases. I told my mother on the phone that I was excited. I told my best friend I was finally chasing something real. I told myself this was the start of a new chapter. I was lying to all 3 of us. The truth was, I hadn't slept properly in 2 years. Not real sleep. Not the kind where you close your eyes and the world goes black. I had been living on 3-hour scraps stitched together with coffee, panic, and the kind of stubbornness you only develop when there is no one left to catch you if you fall. The new job was at a corporate firm, a real one, the kind where men wore suits that cost more than my mother's monthly pension, the kind where the salary letter came on thick paper. I'd worked years to get there. I told myself it would be worth it. I told myself I just had to outlast the exhaustion. I moved into room 403 on a Tuesday. The building was old in that elegant way that rich cities allow some buildings to be. Marble in the lobby, a doorman who pretended not to see me dragging my suitcases. The elevator smelled like cold metal and somebody's expensive perfume. I rode up to the 4th floor with a cardboard box full of cooking pots and a chest that was tight from too many flights of stairs. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Like the carpet had been engineered to swallow footsteps and secrets. I found room 403. I unlocked the door. I stepped inside. It was small. Small even for someone like me who'd lived in worse. But it was clean. And the window faced east, which meant the sun would come up in my face every morning, which meant I would have an excuse for the red in my eyes. I unpacked nothing. I sat on the bare mattress. I stared at the wall. I don't remember crying. I just remember the wall. That night, I didn't even bother changing out of my clothes. I lay down on top of the sheets, fully dressed like a man who didn't expect sleep and was no longer brave enough to fight for it. I closed my eyes out of habit, not hope. And then it started. A single note, then another, then a phrase soft and careful like someone testing whether the world was still listening. A piano, coming through the wall on my left, coming from room 402. The melody was slow, melancholy. Not the cheap, dramatic kind of melancholy you hear in movies. This was specific. It was the sound of a man speaking only to himself, the kind of music you don't perform, the kind you confess. I should have been annoyed. New city, new apartment, and now a midnight noise complaint waiting to happen. I wasn't annoyed. My body, which had been at war with itself for 2 years, did something unbelievable. My shoulders dropped. My jaw unclenched. The knot at the base of my skull, the one that had become so permanent I'd stopped noticing it, started to loosen. The melody worked through my chest like warm water through a frozen pipe. I closed my eyes. I woke up at 9 in the morning. Let me say that again, because even now, sitting here telling you this, I can't believe it. I woke up at 9 in the morning. I had slept for 10 hours. 10 hours. Straight. Without waking, without dreaming, without the cold sweat at 4 a.m. that had become my second alarm. I lay there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid that if I shifted my body, I would discover I was actually dead, because I felt like a man who had been dead and had just been given his body back. The next night, it happened again. Piano, sleep, 10 hours. The third night, the same. By the fourth day, I should have been grateful. Instead, I was terrified. Because here's the thing about people who have been broken for a long time. Peace feels like a trap. Healing feels like a setup. When you have not slept for 2 years and you suddenly sleep, you do not think, "Thank God." You think, "What is wrong?" I started checking the locks twice, 3 times. I sniffed my water before drinking it. I lay awake on the 5th night, refusing to surrender to the music, convinced someone was pumping gas through the vents. Someone, I thought, someone is doing this to me. The next morning, I bought a CCTV camera. A small one, plug and play, the kind that paranoid men buy and pretend they're just being careful. I set it up on the bookshelf, aimed at my bed and the door. I went to work. I came home. I went through the routine: kettle, instant noodles, shower. I lay down. The piano started. I slept 10 hours. And then I sat at my tiny kitchen table the next evening, laptop open, and I watched the footage of myself sleeping. There was no one, no intruder, no gas, nothing on my window. The door didn't open, the vents didn't move. There was nothing in that room except me, curled on my side like a child, breathing slow and even, and the faint, faint sound of a piano bleeding through the wall. I closed the laptop. I sat on the floor. I cried. I don't know how long. Long enough that my knees went numb. Long enough that the streetlights outside changed color. Long enough that the music from room 402 started up again, soft and apologetic, like the man on the other side of the wall could somehow hear me losing it. 2 years, I thought. 2 years of fighting for sleep. 2 years of doctors and pills and lavender oil and meditation apps and warm milk and weighted blankets. 2 years of being told to manage your stress by people who had never been this tired. 2 years. And here, in a strange apartment, in a city I had moved to out of desperation, a man I had never met was healing me through plaster and drywall. I felt seen. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt seen by a song. I sat there on the floor and I made a decision. I owed him something. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know if he was old or young or kind or cruel. I only knew his music, but I owed him. The same way you owe someone who pulls you out of a river. I would feed him. That was the only thing I knew how to do that felt like love. The next evening, I cooked pasta. Not the fast pasta, not the boil it and stir in jar sauce pasta. The real kind. The kind my grandmother taught me, with garlic browning slowly in olive oil, with fresh tomatoes blistering on the pan, with basil torn by hand because she said scissors made it bitter. I stood in my small kitchen and I cooked like I was praying. I plated it on my one nice plate, the one I'd carried with me through 3 moves and never used. I covered it with foil, and I walked across the hall. I stood in front of room 402 for a full minute before I knocked. What was I going to say? "Hi, you've been healing me, here's some carbs." "Hi, I'm the lunatic in 403, I bought a security camera because of you." "Hi, I think I love your music, and I don't even know what your voice sounds like." I knocked. Footsteps. Slow, then a pause, then the door opened. He was younger than I expected, maybe 28, maybe 30, tall, lean in a way that wasn't athletic but careful, like someone who forgot to eat. His hair was a mess, sticking up at the back like he'd been lying down. He was wearing a faded gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows and sweatpants that had a small hole in the knee. His eyes were tired. I want to be specific about this because his eyes are what got me, not in a poetic way, in a real way. They were the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting anything from anyone. The eyes of someone who had been the smartest person in every room and the loneliest person in every bed. They flicked down to the foil-covered plate in my hands, then back up at my face, and something in them changed. Not opened, not warmed, just shifted. Like he'd noticed the weather for the first time in years. "I'm in 403, I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "Your piano. I've been sleeping for the first time in 2 years. I just wanted to say thank you." He blinked. "I made pasta," I said, like an idiot. He took the plate. He didn't smile. He just took it, very gently, like he was afraid it would dissolve. He said, "Come in." I came in. His apartment looked like mine, except his was even emptier. A mattress on the floor, a small lamp, a stack of books in the corner, mostly classical music scores. And against the far wall, an upright piano, an old one, the kind with the wood worn smooth where hands had touched it for decades. That was it. That was his whole life, from what I could see. He sat on the floor and started eating. I want you to understand how this man ate. He ate the way a stray dog eats when someone finally remembers it exists. Carefully at first, like he didn't trust the food, and then faster, and then like he was about to cry. He didn't speak, he didn't look up, he just ate. By the time he was halfway through, his hand was shaking a little. I sat across from him on the floor. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to spook him. When he finished, he set the fork down. He looked at the empty plate for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "I haven't eaten food that someone cooked for me in 8 years." 8 years? I said, "What?" He shrugged. He pulled his sleeves down over his hands. "Takeout, delivery. My family has chefs, but that's different. That's not food. That's fuel. Strategy." Strategy? Long story. He smiled finally, a small, broken smile. "What's your name?" "Minho." "Jinwoo," he said. It would be a long time before I learned his full name. It would be a long time before I learned anything real about him at all. But that night, he was Jinwoo, the man with tired eyes in a worn-out hoodie, eating pasta off the floor of an empty room, telling me he hadn't been fed in 8 years. I made an offer. I don't even remember exactly how I said it. I think I babbled. Something about how I cooked too much for one person anyway. Something about how the music was helping me sleep. Something about how it was unfair that I was getting all this benefit and he was just playing into the dark. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When he finished, he tilted his head and said, "So, food for music." "Food for music," I said. "That's the deal?" "That's the deal." He held out his hand. I shook it. His fingers were long and warm and stronger than I expected. I remember thinking, he's a pianist. Of course his hands are strong. I didn't think, he's a man who has been holding himself up by his hands for years and finally letting go. That came later. 6 months. Let me try to be honest with you about what 6 months looked like. The first month, he was shy. He never came to my apartment. I always came to his. He ate everything I cooked, but he never asked for anything. He never said he was hungry. He just played every night, and I brought food at the end of the workday, and we sat on his floor and ate and talked about nothing. The second month, he started to ask questions about my day, about my mother, about what I wanted to be when I grew up, even though I was already grown. He had a way of asking questions like he was the only person who had ever cared about the answer. I told him things I had never told anyone, about my insomnia, about my father, about the way I had cried in a bathroom stall on my first day of work because the man at the front desk had been rude to me, and I had used up all my courage just walking in. He listened. He always listened. The third month, he made me laugh. I don't know how. He had a dry sense of humor that crept up on you. He would say one thing, a quiet sideways thing, and you would be halfway through a sentence before you realized he had just gutted you. We laughed a lot. I had not laughed in 2 years. The fourth month, I started complaining about work. This is where the knife goes in, looking back. This is where I want to reach into the past and shake myself. I told him about my boss, or more accurately, my boss's boss's boss, the chairman, a man none of us had ever met. We called him the invisible tyrant. He sent down policy changes that wrecked people's lives. He canceled our bonuses one quarter without explanation. He fired a whole department by email. We hated him. I hated him most of all because my coworker Sujin had cried in the break room over a memo he had signed. I ranted about this man for an hour one night, slumped on Jinwoo's floor eating leftover pasta. I called him a coward. I called him a vampire. I called him a parasite in cufflinks. Jinwoo listened. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked very softly, "Do you think he knows that you all hate him?" I laughed. "He doesn't care. People like that don't care." Jinwoo nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. I should have seen it. How do you not see it? 6 months, and I did not see it. In the 5th month, I started buying him things. Small things first. A scarf because his neck was always cold, a pair of gloves because his hands were precious to me, a new lamp because the old one was dying. He accepted everything with that same small, careful smile. He always said thank you. He always touched my wrist when he said it, like he wanted to make sure I was real. Then the shoes. His shoes were falling apart, old sneakers, one of them with a sole separating from the front. I noticed because he tried to hide it from me. He kept his feet under his legs when he sat on the floor. I noticed anyway. I notice everything when I love someone. I went to the store on a Saturday. I bought him a pair of leather shoes, real ones, dark brown, simple, sturdy. They cost 140,000 won. That was 3 days of food for me. I had to skip lunch for a week and a half to afford them. And I told myself it was fine because I had pasta at his place anyway, and because I was going to give them to him on his birthday. His birthday was at the end of the 6th month. I cooked the dinner. I won't list everything. I want you to imagine it. A small table I had borrowed from a coworker, a tablecloth from a thrift store, 3 candles, pasta, because that was our beginning, a roast chicken because his mother had once made him one, he said, when he was 9, wine, even though I do not really drink, a cake I made myself, badly, with the frosting too sweet and the top a little crooked. He cried when he saw it. He sat down at the table and he cried, his hands over his face, his shoulders shaking, and I came around behind him and put my arms around him and pressed my face into his hair, and I said, hey, it's okay. It's just dinner." He shook his head. He couldn't speak. It would be a long time before I understood why he was crying. That was the night of the first kiss. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The kind of slow, steady rain the city only delivers in spring, when the air finally remembers how to be soft. He had moved to the piano after dinner. He played a piece I had never heard before. He told me he had written it. "For who?" I asked. He smiled at the keys. He said, "For the man in 403. I crossed the room. I stood behind him. He stopped playing. He stood up. He turned. The rain on the window, the wine still on my breath. His hoodie, gray and soft and so familiar by now I could have drawn it from memory. His eyes, less tired than they had been in the beginning. Less tired because of me. I want to tell you it was perfect. It was. It was the kind of first kiss that ruins you for other first kisses. Quiet, slow, like an apology and a promise at the same time. His hands held my face like I might break, and mine held his hips like he might leave. And afterward, we just stood there with our foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air. He said, "I have never been wanted for anything that wasn't useful." I said, "I want you for nothing." He laughed. A wet, broken laugh. He said, "That's the best thing anyone has ever said to me." The lights stayed low. The piano stayed silent. The rain kept falling. Some things are between us. I will not tell you everything. The next morning, my company announced a big event. The new chairman was being unveiled, a succession. The invisible tyrant had stepped down, or more accurately, had been promoted to the board, and his heir was finally taking the seat. Mandatory attendance, full company, a gala in the lobby of the main building, champagne, photographers, a stage with a podium. I didn't want to go. I was tired. I had spent the previous night with Jinwoo and I had only slept 4 hours, and I had to take the bus across the city in a suit that was a little too tight in the shoulders. He had asked me that morning, "Where are you going today?" I had said, "Stupid corporate thing. They're showing off the new boss." He had nodded. He had not looked up. I see now that he had not been able to look up. I stood in the back of the crowd. There were maybe 400 of us, packed in like cattle, holding plastic cups of champagne we weren't allowed to drink yet. The CEO of operations gave a speech, then the head of the board, then a video about the company's history, full of black and white photos and inspirational music. Then they called him. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our new chairman." I want to remember exactly how I felt in the half-second before he walked out. I was thinking about Jinwoo. I was thinking about whether I had time to pick up bread on the way home. I was thinking that my shoes were pinching. I was thinking I would tell Jinwoo about the new chairman tonight because he liked to hear me rant, and I was sure this new one would be worse than the last. The curtains parted. He walked out. I didn't recognize him at first. That is the strangest part of this story, and the part I cannot fully explain. He walked out, and for a full 2 seconds, my brain refused to identify him. He was wearing a suit, black, slim, tailored to the millimeter. A white shirt so clean it looked surgical, a tie the color of dried blood. His hair was combed back, his jaw was tight, his shoulders were squared. His face was Jinwoo's face, but it was not Jinwoo. The eyes were not tired, the mouth was not soft. The hands at his sides were not the hands that had held my face the night before. This was a different man, a colder man, a man who had been trained from birth to walk into a room and make 400 people stop breathing. He stepped to the podium. He looked out over the crowd. He smiled, a small, polished, professional smile. I felt my knees go. The man next to me had to catch my elbow. He whispered, "You okay?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't make my mouth work. Jinwoo started to speak. His voice was the same voice that had said, "I have never been wanted for anything that wasn't useful." The same voice that had said, "For the man in 403. He was using that voice now to talk about quarterly returns, about strategic vision, about the next 5 years. I looked down. His shoes. I looked at his shoes. Black, polished, Italian leather, the kind that has the brand stamped into the sole, the kind that costs more than my rent. They caught the light of the gala chandeliers and gleamed like wet stone. I thought of the brown leather shoes I had bought him, the ones I had skipped lunch for, the ones I had saved for, the ones I had presented to him in a cardboard box wrapped in newspaper because I couldn't afford gift wrap, the ones he had cried over. The ones he had cried over. He had been crying because he was rich. He had been crying because a man who could afford anything had spent 6 months watching a man who could afford nothing buy him cheap things, and he had said nothing. He had let me. He had let me skip lunch. He had let me hand over my rent money. He had let me protect him from a poverty he did not live in. I want to describe the feeling. I want to describe it correctly. It wasn't anger, not first. First was a kind of cold, slow water flooding into the bottom of my lungs. First was the realization that every single thing I had given him had been a joke. A vacation, a 6-month visit from a poor boy he had played at being friends with so he could feel for a little while like someone who had a life. I had been a hobby. I had been a hobby for a billionaire. I didn't make a scene. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the champagne. I want to tell you I did something cinematic. I didn't. I just turned around. I walked out of the gala. I took the elevator down. I crossed the lobby. I got on the bus. I went back to room 402. I packed 2 suitcases,
the same two I had brought 6 months earlier. I left the lamp he had liked. I left the borrowed table. I left the cooking pots because I never wanted to cook again. I wrote a resignation email and sent it from my phone in the back of a taxi. The piano was silent in room 402. He was still at the gala. I left. I left and I did not say goodbye and I did not look back. And I told myself I would never look back. And for 2 years, I didn't. Here is the part I learned later. I learned this in pieces, over months, from his parents, from a private investigator I never asked for, from him. Jinwoo collapsed 3 days after I left. He had gone home to his real apartment, not 402. 402 had been a side rental, a hideout, a private retreat, and he had stopped eating. He had stopped playing. He had sat in front of his real grand piano in his real penthouse, and he had not touched a key. On the 4th day, his bodyguard found him on the floor. He was hospitalized, exhaustion, malnutrition, a heart that had decided it was tired. 2 weeks later, his parents tracked me down. I had moved to a different part of the city, new job, a smaller one, less prestige, more peace. I was sleeping again, sort of. Not 10 hours, but enough. I was getting through. His mother came to my new office. She did not call ahead. She did not bring security. She just walked in, a small woman in a cream-colored coat, and she sat across from me in a meeting room, and she put her hands flat on the table. She said, "Please." I said, "No." She said, "I am not here to bring him back to you. I am here to tell you that we failed him, and I think you should know." I almost stood up. I almost walked out. But there was something in her face, not the practiced softness of a rich woman doing damage control, but something older, something cracked. I sat. She told me about Jinwoo. She told me he had been born into a kind of family where love had to be inferred from spreadsheets. She told me his first piano teacher had been hired when he was 4, that he had played his first competition at 6, that he had been called the Heir before he was called by his name. She told me that he had once told her, when he was 12, that he wanted to know what it would be like if no one needed anything from him. She told me his greatest fear was being loved for what he could provide, that he had once dated a woman for a year and discovered, on the day he proposed, that she had been recording their conversations, that he had been engaged to a man, briefly, and that man had asked for a building, an actual building. She told me about 402. He rented it 5 years ago under a false name. He went there when he could not breathe. He played there because he could not play at home. She said she had never asked him what he did there. She had been afraid to know. And then he met you. I said, "Stop." She said, "He came home one night, 6 months ago, and he ate a real meal for the first time since he was a boy. He told me about it. He said, 'A man across the hall fed me.' He did not tell me your name. He would not tell me anything about you. He said, 'If I tell you, you will ruin it.'" I didn't speak. We raised him to be a chairman. We did not raise him to be a man. He lied to you because he was afraid. He was afraid that if you knew, you would become like the others. He was wrong, and I have told him he was wrong, and he knows now that he was wrong. But I want you to know he is paying for it. He has not played the piano in 6 weeks. The doctor says his lungs sound like an old man's. He's 29. He is dying because a boy across the hall stopped bringing him pasta. I stood up. I walked to the window. I looked at the city. I said, "I'm not going back. I am not asking you to. I am asking you to come and tell him to his face that you are not going back, because right now he is hoping, and the hoping is killing him." That was how I ended up at the hospital. It was on the 7th floor, private room, the kind of room where the flowers are arranged daily by someone whose job is just to arrange flowers. He was in the bed in a thin gown, looking smaller than I remembered. His hair was greasy. His hands lay on the blanket like they had given up. There were tubes in his nose. I stood at the foot of the bed. I did not sit. I did not take off my coat. He looked at me. He started to cry, quietly, like a child who has learned not to. He said, "I'm sorry. I know. I should have told you. Yes, I was afraid you would—" "I know what you were afraid of." My voice was harder than I expected. I had been practicing this in my head for 2 weeks, and I was not going to let it go to waste. "Your mother explained, and I understand. I do. I'm not a monster. I understand that you've been used your whole life. I understand that you needed somewhere safe. I understand I felt safe to you." He nodded. He kept crying. "But here is what I cannot understand." He looked up. "I bought you shoes." His face, God, his face, it crumpled. "I bought you shoes, Jinwoo. I skipped lunch for a week and a half. I added it up. 3 sandwiches and 4 packets of instant noodles. That's what I gave up to buy you those shoes. And you took them. You let me put them in your hands and you cried. And I thought you were crying because no one had ever loved you. But you were crying because someone poor had finally been kind enough to be poor for you. You were crying because I was a story you got to live in." No, that's not— "I didn't mind that you were rich. Do you understand me? I never minded that. If you had walked into room 403 in your $10,000 suit and said, 'Hi, I'm Jinwoo. I'm the chairman. I would like some pasta,' I would have laughed, and I would have cooked for you anyway. I did not love you for what you had. I would have loved you with nothing. That was never the problem." He could not speak. I said, "I minded that you watched me struggle to save you from a life you weren't even living." The room was very quiet. I said goodbye, Jinwoo. I left. 2 years. You don't know what 2 years can do until you live through them. 2 years is enough to sleep again, slowly, in fits and starts without piano music. 2 years is enough to get good at a new job and then get promoted out of it. 2 years is enough to start dating someone, briefly, and to discover that you are not over what happened, and that you cannot give a new person what they deserve, and to end it kindly. 2 years is enough to start cooking again. 2 years is not enough to forget him. I tried. I tried in the only way I knew how, which was by being busy. I worked harder than I should have. I got a senior position at a different firm. I bought my own small apartment in a different district. I gave my mother money. I called my best friend more. I lived a real life, on purpose, the way a man lives a life when he is trying to prove to himself that he is not a ghost. But every now and then, late at night, in the dark, I would hear a piano in my head, and I would lie there, and I would wait for sleep. I never went back to room 403. I never asked anyone about Jinwoo. I did not look him up online, though once or twice, I'll be honest with you, I almost did. I closed the browser. I went to bed. I told myself the story was over. And then, a Friday in October, 2 years and 3 months after I had walked out of that hospital room, I was in a part of the city I rarely visited, having a drink with a coworker. We had finished a difficult quarter. She wanted to celebrate. I told her 1 drink. 1 drink became 3. 3 became, let's find somewhere quieter. We wandered. We turned down a side street. There was a small bar at the bottom of a flight of stone steps, the kind of place you don't notice unless you are looking. A wooden sign, a warm light, the faint sound of music from inside. She said, "There, that one. It looks cute." I went down the steps. I opened the door. There were maybe 15 people inside. A small room, low ceilings, candles on the tables, a bar along one wall. And at the back, on a tiny stage no bigger than a kitchen table, an upright piano. I knew before I looked. My body knew. My body knew before my eyes did, the way your body knows the front door of your childhood home in the dark. I felt the music in my chest first. The melody. The same melody he used to play in room 402. The one I had heard through the wall. The one that had healed me before I knew his name. I looked. He was at the piano. He was wearing a suit, not the cold one from the gala. A softer one. Charcoal. The tie loose, his hair was longer than I remembered. There were faint lines around his eyes that had not been there before. I looked down.
He was wearing the shoes. The brown leather shoes, the ones I had bought him. They were old now, worn at the heel, the leather creased and softened by years of walking, but polished, carefully polished. Resoled, I could see, more than once. Lovingly maintained. I stood at the door. I could not move. My coworker said something behind me. I didn't hear her. He finished the piece. He looked up to thank the small audience. He saw me. His hands fell to his lap. His mouth opened. He didn't speak. He just looked. The room went quiet, not for any dramatic reason. Most people in the bar didn't know what was happening. It just went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when something is being decided. I crossed the room. I don't remember choosing to. My feet just walked. I stopped in front of the small stage. He stood up, slowly. He came down to where I was. We were close enough now that I could see he was thinner, that his eyes were tired again, but in a different way. The tiredness of a man who has been waiting, not the tiredness of a man who has been hiding. He said, "Minho?" I said, "You're here every weekend." He nodded. He swallowed. He said, 104. I counted. Every weekend, since in the hospital. In bars, small ones. Anywhere I thought you might walk in. I knew it was insane. I kept doing it. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I didn't want to use my power to find you. I didn't want to send people. I didn't want you to be summoned. I wanted you to walk in, like you did the first time, like an accident. So that if you came, it would be because you came." I looked at his feet again. I had to. "You kept the shoes," I said. He looked down. He smiled. The smile was small and broken and unguarded. He said, "I have 1,000 pairs of shoes. I wear these." The bar started moving again around us, glasses clinking, a laugh somewhere, the faint hum of the heater. But the world had narrowed to him and to me, and to a pair of brown leather shoes that had walked across a city looking for me. He said, "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me." I said, "Good." He said, "I'm not going to ask you to come back." I said, "Good." He said, "I just want to ask one thing, and if you say no, I will leave. I will stop playing in bars. I will stop counting weekends. I will let you go. I promise." I said, "Ask." He took a breath. He looked at me with the eyes that had once looked at me from across a plate of pasta on an empty floor. He said, "I've been playing for 104 weekends. I'm still the man from 402. Will you let me earn the pasta this time?" I want to tell you I said yes right away. I didn't. I want to tell you I fell into his arms. I didn't. I looked at him for a long time. I looked at the man who had broken me, and at the man who had been broken by it. I thought about the 2 years. I thought about the brown shoes. I thought about the 104 weekends. I thought, he doesn't get me back. Not yet. Not in one night. I said, "One dinner?" His eyes filled. I said, "One dinner. I'll cook, you eat, we'll talk, and then we'll see." He nodded. He nodded and nodded like a man who was being given air for years, and he said, "Yes, yes, anything, one dinner." I said, "Don't bring me anything. No flowers, no gifts, don't show off. You come to my apartment in those shoes. You come as the man from 402. We start from there." He said, "I will." I turned to leave. I almost made it to the door. I turned back. I said, "Jinwoo?" He looked up. I said, "It's pasta. Don't be late." He laughed, a real laugh, a wet, surprised laugh, and the sound went into me and unlocked something I had thought was sealed for good. I pushed the door open. I climbed the stone steps. I walked out into the cold October air. The first dinner is on Saturday. I haven't decided yet whether I'll forgive him. I haven't decided yet whether I'll let him love me again.
I haven't decided yet whether the music will work the way it used to, or whether some things, once broken, stay a little broken even after they are repaired. But I know this. I know that tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I will go home and I will lie down in my bed and I will close my eyes and I will not have to fight for sleep. Not because of a piano, not because of a stranger across the hall, because of me. Because I am the one who walked into the bar, because I am the one who said one dinner, because I am the one who chose, in my own time, to leave the door just a little. The man in 402 is going to have to earn it, and maybe, this time, he will. The end.